about 12 cups of water coming up to a boil. There you can see a nice bubble. And I have 2.5 cups of yellow split peas into there. I'm just going to scrape down all of it, and that's been washed. You don't need to soak it or anything like that. Just wash it with cool water, rinse it, and repeat it maybe 2 or 3 times. That's all we need to do. We need to bring this back up to a boil. But as it starts coming back up to a boil, right away I'm going to go in with the turmeric, or as we call it in Trinidad and Tobago, saffron. Not saffron, but saffron. And that's just dried ground turmeric. I was going to say cumin. But all we need to do now is give that a good stir, bring it up to a boil, and don't do anything else. Once it comes to a boil, you're going to see there's a sort of a froth at the top. We're going to remove that, skim it off, remove it down the sink, and then we're going to add all the flavor ingredients. And you can see the sort of froth or foamy stuff is starting to happen at the top. And the reason why I don't want to add my garlic and onion and pepper and everything at this point is because once I start to go skimming off, chances are I will remove it. In advance, I have 1.5 pounds of salted pigtail that I boiled. I put it in water, covered it completely in water, brought it up to a boil, and I let that go for about 40 to 45 minutes or so. Then I drained it, I rinsed it, and here we are today with it. Now here's the thing with the salted pigtail, the reason for pre-boiling it is to remove some of the salt it was cured in and to help tenderize it a bit, because it can be a bit tough. Later on we will taste and adjust the dal for salt, but at this point there's still remnants of salt in here. And this is one of them classic sort of dal my mom would make, and this is a Caribbean style, Trinidad and Tobago, Guyana, those areas. You would have grown up eating this, and today the recipe has changed over the years, where I see people are adding other things to the dal, but I'm going to keep it as simple and true to how my mother, and well, I can't say her mother before her because she didn't eat pork, but how my mother and my grandmother on my father's side would have made it with the salted pigtail. And honestly, it's one of the tastiest dal you will ever have. I mean to say, Uncle Chris not leading all you astray. And there's this sort of froth I was talking about. We want to remove that, dump it down the sink. So all I'm going to go in now is with my spoon and just skim that off, and that's going to go down the sink into the rubbish. And I'll just continue doing that. I'm just going to push it over like so, and that's going. And 2.5 cups of dal that we started off with there will give you a lot. So what I like doing, and you may think, well Chris, that's kind of quite a bit. Whatever I don't eat today is going to go into, once it's cooled, I put it into freezer containers and I freeze it, and then whenever your boy Jones in for a nice little dal, that is when I rock that, I thaw it out, and then I don't have to go through the entire process. Being careful at this point, I'm just going to add all that salted pigtail in there. I'm then going to add onion. We've got garlic. And all I did was I smashed the cloves of garlic. If you wanted to add a bit of Caribbean green seasoning, that's totally up to, like I said, you can use this recipe as a sort of a base and add other flavors and stuff like that you like. So if you want to add some Caribbean green seasoning in there, by all means. If you have pimento peppers, not pimento seeds, which is allspice, but pimento peppers, the seasoning peppers or flavor peppers, you can rock that. We've got black pepper. Of course, we want some heat in there, so I got 3 bird pepper, or some of you call it bird's eye pepper. I'm just going to snap them, toss them in there. If you want to leave out the whole spicy element to this, you can certainly do so, but it does add a nice originality and depth of flavor to things. So I've got 3 of them that I just broke up in half. Wash your hands with soap and water after. And all you're trying to do now is bring this up to a boil. Then we're going to reduce it to a sort of a rolling boil, and this is why I added quite a bit of water in there. And we're going to cook that for anywhere from an hour to 1.5 hours. Yeah, it will vary depending on the yellow split peas that we use. Now, if you're looking for the traditional version of this, which is a fully vegan dish, just search Dhal at caribbeanpot.com and that recipe is there. I also have a version with salted beef. and I have one where I use, and something mommy would always make for us is a version with 50-50 sort of ratio with yellow split peas and lentils. I also have another version where mommy would use the green dal, the green split peas, as well as yellow split peas. And finally, I have a version where I used, and that is the sort of cheat version, if you've ever used red lentils to make a Caribbean style dal. I'm telling you, in half the time, it takes half the time, because that red lentil cooks so fast. And I'm telling you, boy, it is a good thing. Now, the salted pigtail will bring a unique taste to this dal. So I urge you, if you're a pork eater, please give this one a try if you can get salted pigtails. If you cannot get salted pigtails, I have a video and a recipe on CaribbeanPot.com showing you how to make your own. So it's coming up to a boil. Once it comes up to a boil, I'm going to reduce it to a sort of between a simmer and a rolling boil. And the only thing we need to do for the next hour or so is to stir it maybe 1 or 2 times, and to make sure there's enough water in there. So if you need to top it up with water, please do. It's been an hour and 25 minutes. You can see the peas has broken down, it's getting nice and thick, but there's still some like remnants of the peas in there, the chunky pieces of garlic and onion and pepper and everything else. At this point, may I recommend you taste and adjust the salt. Remember, we didn't add any salt. Keep it in mind that the salted pigtail will bring that sodium element to things. In my case here, I added a half a teaspoon of salt. What I almost also mentioned, I went in with a further 4 cups of water during the boiling process. At this point, we're gonna fish out the pieces of salted pigtail. You notice how that it's sort of split there? That means it's nice and tender, and boy, even the bones, you know, some people like chewing the bones. If you like chewing the bones, well, I mean to say, you're gonna be in heaven. All I'm gonna do is remove all of the pieces of salted pigtail now. We're gonna return it. Don't sweat, don't panic. I want all you're having to get medication and breath. No, hold on. We're just gonna remove it, set it aside, and then we have to swizzle. We have to swizzle the dal, which means we're gonna break it down even further to get a sort of a nice smooth silky texture. But again, that step will depend on how you like your dal. And this is the swizzle stick, a long handle with that sort of perforated sort of edges on the bottom there. If you don't have this, you can always use an immersion blender. And all I'm going to do is go down to the center, put my hands together, and a back and forth motion like so. And I turn the heat off because I'm not trying to get burned, but be very careful when doing this. A whisk will work, but I don't think it will work as efficiently as this or an immersion blender. Now, the thing, and I've mentioned this in previous dal recipes, is if you are using an immersion blender, what I would recommend doing is pulse, pulse, pulse. Don't go continuous, just a few pulses, because then you're going to end up with a frothy dal and you're going to ruin it. So I'm just going to give this about a minute or so of this sort of action that you're seeing here, and then we're going to move on to the final 2 steps. Once you're happy with the consistency, you're going to go back in, being very gentle, and I think I just made a mess on my stove, but small thing. You're going to go back in with that salted pigtail, hit that a stir, and we've got one final step to pull this all together. This step is called chunking, and what I have here is some olive oil, cloves of garlic that I just smashed, and cumin, or what we call jeera seeds. And what we're going to do, and this is one of the few times, well, the only time I will tell you, you need to burn that garlic. That garlic needs to have a bit of char. So I'm just going to turn up the heat just a little bit more. The oil is going to start to start to smoke. So if you wanted to use vegetable oil, which has a higher smoke point, or any other oil that has a higher smoke point, cool. I just love the flavor of that olive oil. So a few minutes, this is going to fry. The cumin or jeera is going to give it that flavor. The garlic is going to burn. Then, being very gentle, we're going to take that and toss it into the finished dal, and that is what we call chunky. Then you're going to give it a mix, and yo, dal done, boy. Earlier, when I used what I call a swizzle stick, some people call that a dal gutney. Now, growing up in the Caribbean, I remember my mom had what's called, and it wasn't a little frying pan she would use. It was like a long handle metal ladle, and I think it was called kaichul. If you guys are familiar with it, if you mind dropping a comment down below just to verify whether I'm correct or not, but I'm almost certain. So there was the Dhal gutni and the kaichul. So she would have used a kaichul, and the beauty about using a kaichul is what you would do is after it's hot, you would go, the entire kaichul will go into the pot, and you would slam the lid, not slam, but you would put the lid on there, and as you turn it, all that smoke and everything else from adding hot oil to the dal, so basically liquid, it would have created a smoky flavor to go with the sort of charred edges of the garlic. And yo, that smoky, proper things, boy. Anyhow, a minute more. Just turned off my stove. I'm being very gentle. And there's that mess I was talking about on my stove. But anyhow, we good. We good. No worries. If I wasn't filming, I would have put the lid on there, but you know, one man show. I just don't have the capability of doing it all. So what I would recommend doing is, if you're doing this at home, you would toss in that, have the lid, excuse me for a second. So you would have the lid as soon as you pour it in, and then you would close it to keep that sort of smokiness about it in there, to capture that. That is the essence of a good dal. So all you would do now, hit that a stir, and you've just made split peas dal with salted pigtail. Remember I mentioned earlier that I have a few of these recipes over at caribbeanpot.com, so I do hope you all get an opportunity to give this one a try. It is a lovely flavor, and boy, I'm drinking this like a soup. Remember, as it cools down, this is a cast iron, glazed cast iron pan. It will thicken up further. Sup, soldiers? Listen, if you enjoy this recipe, I'd really appreciate it if you hit subscribe and click that bell notification thing. If you've made the recipe, take a picture and send it to me. Email address down here. I mean, trying to tell people the email address, them butts will take the address and do all kind of thing with it. And tag me on Instagram at Caribbean Pot. I really appreciate you guys, and thanks for being in my kitchen with me today. Irie? I know many of you may have noticed it, but it's been about 15 minutes since it was all done cooking. And you may have noticed it was a bit watery, and this, I purposely made it watery to be able to film this part of things to show you all. So if ever you end up with watery dal, what you would do, you would put the lid on there, let it sit for about 15-20 minutes. Then what's going to happen is all that extra water or liquid will be at the very surface. So you would just go in with your spoon, put it into a container, and then you can dump that out, and that is the easiest way to thicken up. Notice how much water I'm taking up. Like I said, I purposely made it watery. I don't like watery dal, and I'm sure many of you probably don't like watery dal. So if you're ever in that position where you took it off the stove too early, you didn't give it enough time, and all you would do, and that is just somewhat clear liquid, it's not the pure dal, that is what you would do to remove it, and then you would just dump that down the sink. That's simple as that, yeah? Then all you would do, you would stir that, and you notice, if you go back to a couple minutes ago in the video, you will notice how much thicker it is now. Chris here, CaribbeanPot.com. Always a pleasure having you all in the kitchen with me. Just learned a couple things, how to make that dal, but more importantly, how to thicken up that dal if it's a bit too watery. Alright? Alright.